Morning sunlight streamed through specially designed air-purified windows as I moved through our carefully structured routine. 6:30 a.m. was breathing treatment time. 7 a.m. was medication with breakfast. 8 a.m. was when Tyler would settle into his online school setup while I prepared for my shift at the fire station. Our lives operated with the precision of a well-maintained engine, necessary for managing my 14-year-old son's severe respiratory condition. I adjusted Tyler's oxygen level as he smiled up at me from his breakfast. His gentle expression always masked the constant battle his lungs fought daily. Cystic fibrosis had entered our lives when he was 2, transforming our world into a careful balance of treatments, adaptations, and unwavering love. "Dad, are you working the 24-hour shift today?" Tyler asked, his voice slightly muffled by the oxygen cannula. "Yes, but remember Mrs. Rodriguez is staying overnight, and all the emergency protocols are posted on the refrigerator," I replied, carefully organizing his medication into the labeled containers. "And you have the emergency oxygen tank by the garage door if anything happens before she arrives." Our home had been modified over 5 years to accommodate Tyler's medical needs. Air purifiers hummed quietly in every room. The garage had been partially converted into a clean storage area for his medical supplies and equipment. From the outside, our house looked mostly like the others in Oakwood Estates, a neat 2-story colonial with green shutters, except for the discreet medical supply delivery area near the side entrance. The neighborhood had always felt like an extension of our sanctuary. When we first moved in, the homeowners association had been reasonable, even helpful. The previous president, Mr. Geller, had immediately granted medical exemptions for our necessary modifications. "Family needs come first," he had said, signing the paperwork without hesitation. But 6 months ago, everything changed when Margaret Wilkins, who everyone now simply called Karen, had been elected HOA president. Her campaign had centered on neighborhood beautification and strict enforcement of standards. Within weeks, violation notices began appearing on doors throughout the community for infractions as minor as garbage cans left visible for too long or unapproved flower varieties in front gardens. I noticed her that morning as I loaded Tyler's spare equipment into my car, standing at the end of the Johnsons' driveway with her ever-present clipboard. She measured their grass with a ruler, making notes with quick, irritated movements. I waved politely while continuing to load my vehicle. Corinne offered a tight smile in return, but her eyes had already moved to the side of our house, narrowing slightly at the sight of the medical supply cabinet. "Dad, do you think she will complain about my equipment again?" Tyler asked from the doorway, having noticed the direction of my gaze. "No, buddy, there is nothing to worry about. We have all the proper exemptions," I assured him, though something in Corinne's calculating expression sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the morning air. The peaceful rhythm of our lives continued that week, marked by the familiar sounds of Tyler's breathing treatments and the beeping of monitors. I left for my 24-hour shifts at the fire station, where as department chief, I oversaw emergency responses across 3 districts and returned home to our sanctuary. The routines we had established gave Tyler stability and safety. What I did not realize then was that storm clouds were gathering on our horizon. The security of our carefully constructed world was about to face its greatest threat, not from fire or smoke that I had spent my career fighting, but from a neighbor with a rule book and something to prove. The carefully balanced life we had built was far more fragile than I knew, and Corinne Wilkins had already set her sights on dismantling it piece by regulatory piece. The first notice arrived on pale blue stationery adorned with cheerful flowers, the Oakwood Estates logo prominently displayed in the corner. The pleasant design contrasted sharply with the ice-cold wording inside. Violation. Section 12.4 of Community Bylaws. No medical equipment, storage units, or utility items may be visible from street view. Fine. $150. Remediation required within 7 days. I stood at my property line the next afternoon, notice in hand, watching Corinne approach with her clipboard. The storage cabinet containing Tyler's oxygen tanks and medical supplies was discreetly positioned against the side of our house, painted the same colonial green as our shutters to blend in. "Mr. Reeves, I trust you received our notice," Corinne said, gesturing toward the cabinet with her pen. "That medical storage unit violates our community aesthetic standards." "Ms. Wilkins, this contains life-saving equipment for my son," I explained calmly. "We have a medical exemption that was approved when we moved in. The previous board granted it immediately." Corinne tapped her clipboard. "The previous administration was lax in enforcement. Section 12.4 is very clear. No exceptions. You will need to move that unsightly cabinet to your backyard or garage. The equipment needs to be accessible in emergencies. That is why it is positioned here," I said, maintaining my composure despite growing frustration. "My son has cystic fibrosis. His oxygen tanks and equipment are not decorative choices." "Rules are rules, Mr. Reeves. Everyone must follow them equally," Corinne responded, her clipboard thumping against the bylaws manual for emphasis. "Otherwise, what kind of community would we have?" As she walked away, Barbara Chen from across the street approached cautiously. She waited until Corinne had turned the corner before speaking. "James, I am so sorry about that," Barbara said quietly. "She has been on a rampage since taking over. Last week she fined the Martins because their son's wheelchair ramp did not match the approved color scheme. Later that evening, I found Tyler sitting on his bed, attempting to hide his portable oxygen concentrator under blankets. My heart sank at the sight. "Buddy, what are you doing? You need that accessible," I said, sitting beside him. "I do not want to cause trouble," Tyler whispered, his thin fingers fidgeting with the blanket edge. "Ethan at school said his mom told him our house breaks the rules." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "You are not causing any trouble. Your health comes first, always." The following week brought the monthly HOA meeting, held in the community center's main room. I arrived early with my medical exemption paperwork in hand, prepared to address the issue professionally. The room filled quickly, an unusual attendance that suggested others had grievances as well. Corinne stood at the front, a projector displaying a PowerPoint presentation titled Community Standards Enforcement. My stomach dropped when she clicked to a slide showing a photograph of our home, the medical cabinet circled in bright red. "This is exactly the type of eyesore that decreases property values," Corinne announced to the room. "We have several such violations that previous administrations inexplicably allowed." I raised my hand. "That cabinet contains medical equipment for my son who has a disability. We have an approved exemption." Corinne smiled thinly. "All exemptions are being reviewed under the new administration. Until then, you must comply with current standards." "My son needs that equipment to breathe," I stated firmly, aware of neighbors shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Moving it would create a safety hazard. "The rules apply to everyone, Mr. Reeves," Corinne replied dismissively. "If we make one exception, soon everyone will want special treatment." After the meeting, I formally submitted a new medical exemption request, complete with letters from Tyler's pulmonologist and respiratory therapist explaining the necessity of the equipment placement. Throughout these confrontations, I never once mentioned my position as district fire chief. I believed reasonable dialogue and medical documentation should be sufficient without pulling rank. Robert Geller, the former HOA president, approached me in the parking lot. "James, this is not right. When I was president, medical accommodations were automatic. Corinne has gotten the board terrified of property values dropping. Fight this." "I am trying to handle this properly," I responded. "I do not want to escalate things and make our living situation uncomfortable for Tyler." I did not know then how much worse things would become, or that my professional patience was about to be tested beyond its limits. The certified letter denying my medical exemption request arrived on the same day as the urgent call from Tyler's pulmonologist. I stood in the kitchen, the official rejection in one hand and my phone in the other, as Dr. Sharma explained that Tyler's latest test results showed deteriorating lung function. "We need to increase his oxygen support and add another daily breathing treatment," Dr. Sharma said, her voice reflecting professional concern. "I am also prescribing a stronger antibiotic regimen. Has he been under additional stress lately?" Rain beat against the windows as I glanced at the HOA letter, its final paragraph highlighting additional fines accumulating at $50 per day until compliance was achieved. "Yes, there have been some issues with our housing situation," I admitted. That evening, I rearranged Tyler's equipment, trying desperately to find configurations that might satisfy both Corinne's aesthetic demands and my son's medical needs. The rejection letter had been issued without any board discussion or medical review, signed by Corinne alone with a handwritten note. Community standards must be maintained. The next morning brought a new development. Corinne's luxury SUV crawled past our home at precisely 9:15 a.m., slowing as she raised her phone to take photographs of our property. This became a daily occurrence, sometimes 3 or 4 times per day. Our home was under surveillance. "Dad, she is out there again," Tyler called from his bedroom window, anxiety evident in his voice. "Try not to worry about it, buddy," I reassured him, though my own concern was growing. "Just focus on your schoolwork and breathing exercises." The fines continued to accumulate. A notice of lien against our property arrived, threatening legal action if the mounting penalties remained unpaid. I consulted with an attorney who specialized in housing issues, but his assessment was grim. "HOAs have extensive powers in this state," he explained. "Fighting them can be costly and time-consuming. You could argue discrimination under the Fair Housing Act, but these cases often drag on for years." In a desperate attempt to compromise, I invested in decorative lattice screens to partially conceal the medical equipment while maintaining accessibility. The modification cost nearly $800, money we could ill afford with Tyler's medical expenses, but I hoped it might satisfy Corinne's aesthetic concerns. The following day, a new violation notice appeared on our door: unapproved exterior modification. Section 8.2, fine, $250. Tyler's health continued to decline under the stress. His oxygen saturation levels dropped, requiring increased support. During my 24-hour shifts at the fire station, a college nursing student named Alicia would come to help with his care and treatments. One Tuesday afternoon while I was on duty, my phone rang. It was Alicia, her voice shaking. "Chief Reeves, that HOA lady just confronted me in your driveway," she reported. "I was unloading the new oxygen concentrator the medical supply company delivered, and she told me I was violating some rule about deliveries. She took pictures of my car and threatened trespassing charges if I came back." I gripped my desk so hard my knuckles turned white. Did she interfere with the equipment? No, but she stood watching until I brought everything inside. Tyler was really upset by the whole thing. That evening, the situation reached its breaking point. I was 3 hours into my shift when the alarm on my phone triggered, the remote monitoring system for Tyler's oxygen levels showing dangerous readings. I called home immediately. "Dad," Tyler gasped into the phone, his voice frighteningly weak. "My main tank is empty and I cannot find the emergency one." "It should be by the garage door in the red case," I said, already signaling to my lieutenant that I had a family emergency. "Use that until I get there." "It is not here," Tyler wheezed. "Someone took it." I broke every speed limit driving home, arriving to find Tyler slumped in the hallway, his lips taking on a bluish tinge as he struggled for air. The emergency oxygen tank that was always kept by the garage door for exactly this type of crisis had vanished. In its place was a laminated notice. Equipment confiscated per section 12.4. Contact HOA office during business hours Monday-Friday to retrieve. Through the side window, I caught a glimpse of Corinne's silhouette walking away down the street, the distinctive red emergency oxygen case clutched in her hand. My son was literally suffocating, while she carried away his life support with the satisfied stride of someone enforcing rules. I cradled Tyler in my arms, dialing 911 with shaking fingers as rage and fear battled for supremacy inside me. "This is Fire Chief James Reeves," I said to the dispatcher. "I need an emergency medical response to 427 Oakwood Drive. Respiratory distress, 14-year-old male with cystic fibrosis. Oxygen saturation critically low." As we waited for the ambulance, I held my gasping son, supporting his fragile frame. This violation had crossed from harassment into life-threatening territory. Something inside me, the patience, the professional courtesy, the belief in reasonable dialogue, finally snapped completely. "It will be okay, Tyler," I whispered, though we both knew it was not okay at all. The wailing sirens approached as I made a silent vow. This was the last time Corinne Wilkins would threaten my child's health. Tomorrow, she would not face a pleading parent. She would face Fire Chief Reeves with all the authority and knowledge that position commanded. Hospital fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the monitoring equipment surrounding Tyler's bed. The steady beep of machines had become both reassuring and maddening during our 18-hour stay in the pediatric intensive care unit. His oxygen levels had stabilized, but the damage to his already compromised lungs could have been catastrophic. Dr. Chen, the attending physician, stood beside me reviewing Tyler's charts. "Another 10 minutes without oxygen supplementation and permanent damage would have been certain," he stated clinically. "What happened to his emergency supply?" I explained the situation, watching the doctor's expression shift from professional concern to outright disbelief. "Someone confiscated medical equipment from a disabled minor," he asked, making additional notes in the chart. "I am documenting this incident fully. This kind of interference with prescribed medical treatment could be considered endangerment." When Tyler was finally cleared for discharge the following afternoon, I made a decision that went against every protective instinct I possessed. I could not bring him home. Not yet. Not while Corinne Wilkins had the power to threaten his safety. "You are going to stay with Aunt Sarah for a little while," I explained as we packed his things, "just until I resolve this situation." Tyler looked up at me with eyes too wise for his 14 years. "She is not going to stop, is she?" "No, buddy, but I am going to stop her," I promised. "I have been trying to handle this as a parent, but it is time I handled it as who I really am." I drove Tyler across town to my sister's house, carrying in his equipment and medications with the careful precision of both a parent and a first responder. Sarah, herself a nurse, understood the situation immediately. "Take whatever time you need," she assured me, helping Tyler settle into her guest room. "He will be safe here." Returning to my empty house that evening brought a silence that was both painful and necessary. Without the constant concern for Tyler's immediate safety, despair transformed into something colder and more precise, a focused fury that clarified my thoughts rather than clouding them. I went to my home office and unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, removing folders I had not needed to access before now. As fire chief for the district, I possessed knowledge and authority I had deliberately kept separate from my identity as Tyler's father. But Corinne Wilkins had forced these worlds to collide when she put my son's life at risk. I spread documents across my dining table like battle plans, county building codes, fire safety regulations, ADA compliance requirements, and HOA bylaws. With a highlighter and post-it notes, I began methodically identifying every violation Corinne and the HOA had committed. Section 308.4 of the County Fire Code. Obstruction of emergency equipment prohibited. Americans with Disabilities Act, Title III. Reasonable accommodations must be made for individuals with disabilities. State Health and Safety Code 114,562. Interference with medical equipment constitutes endangerment. The regulatory codes formed a language of protection that Corinne never expected I could speak so fluently. Through 20 years of fire service and leadership, I had developed an expert understanding of these regulations, their enforcement mechanisms, and the severe penalties for violations. Over the next 3 days, I built my case meticulously. I installed security cameras around my property, documenting Corinne's daily surveillance. I gathered statements from neighbors who had witnessed her confrontation with Tyler's nursing aide. I collected every citation, every threatening letter, every piece of evidence showing the pattern of harassment. "Chief Reeves, it is Barbara from across the street," came a voice when I answered a knock at my door. "We saw what happened with the ambulance. Several of us want to help." By the end of the week, I had witness statements from 7 neighbors, all documenting various instances of Corinne's harassment. Robert Geller, the former HOA president, provided copies of my original medical exemption paperwork that Corinne had apparently lost. My uniform hung in the closet, freshly pressed and complete with the insignia of rank that represented not just a job but 20 years of authority and life-saving expertise. 3 weeks of careful preparation culminated in a single moment as I stood before the mirror, no longer simply a desperate parent but an officer of public safety, straightening the badges of rank that Corinne never knew existed. I scheduled a meeting with the HOA board for 9 a.m. Monday morning. The email request was simple, regarding urgent safety violations requiring immediate attention. The retreat had ended. The counteroffensive was about to begin. Monday morning arrived with perfect clarity, both in the crisp blue sky outside and in my resolute sense of purpose. I dressed methodically in my full dress uniform, the weight of each brass button and commendation familiar, yet somehow more significant today. The silver badge of office gleamed against the dark navy fabric, 20 years of earned authority visible in physical form. I loaded 3 heavy binders of documentation into my department SUV, the official fire district emblem prominently displayed on both doors. The vehicle was rarely used outside of formal functions and inspections, but today called for every symbol of official capacity I could present. The Oakwood Estates HOA office occupied a small converted house at the neighborhood entrance, a quaint building with white columns and a sign proclaiming, "Preserving our community values." I parked directly in front, ensuring the fire department vehicle was unmistakably visible through the front windows. Glass doors reflected morning sunlight and my approaching silhouette as I entered, binders tucked professionally under one arm. Corinne glanced up from her desk, her customer service smile freezing as recognition slowly dawned. Confusion transformed to visible shock as she processed my appearance. "Mr. Reeves, what is this about?" she asked, eyes fixed on my uniform. "Fire Chief Reeves," I corrected calmly, placing my identification and credentials on her desk. "I am here in my official capacity to address numerous code violations and safety hazards identified within the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association jurisdiction." Corinne's expression flickered between uncertainty and defiance. "You should have made an appointment, and any complaints should be submitted in writing using our standard forms." I set the binders down with a substantial thump. "This is not a complaint, Ms. Wilkins. This is an official investigation into violations that fall under County Fire Code Enforcement, ADA compliance regulations, and Emergency Services Obstruction statutes." The room temperature seemed to drop as I opened the first binder. Section 308.4 of the County Fire Code explicitly prohibits the removal, obstruction, or confiscation of emergency medical equipment. Last Thursday at approximately 6:42 p.m., you personally removed a clearly marked emergency oxygen tank from my property. "That was HOA business," Corinne replied, her voice losing some of its certainty. "Your storage violated community guidelines." "This is the confiscation notice you left," I continued, sliding the laminated card across her desk. "By your own documentation, you willfully removed emergency medical equipment from a minor with a disability, resulting in a life-threatening situation requiring emergency transport." I connected my phone to the office's presentation screen, displaying security camera footage that clearly showed Corinne removing the oxygen tank while looking furtively over her shoulder. "That was not properly stored equipment," Corinne attempted, her voice rising slightly. "I was simply enforcing." "Ms. Wilkins, my son was transported to intensive care as a direct result of your actions," I interrupted, my tone remaining professionally even. "The attending physician has provided documentation stating that another 10 minutes without oxygen supplementation would have resulted in permanent lung damage or possible death." Corinne's face paled slightly as I turned to the ADA compliance section. Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act requires reasonable accommodations for individuals with disabilities. This approved medical exemption was filed with the previous board. I placed the original exemption paperwork on her desk, Robert Geller's signature clearly visible at the bottom. "That exemption was under review," Corinne insisted, though her voice had lost its authority. "There is no provision in your bylaws that allows for the revocation of medical accommodations during review," I noted. "Additionally, the review process was conducted without medical consultation or proper board approval, in violation of your own procedural requirements." The office door opened as 3 other HOA board members arrived for the meeting I had scheduled. They froze in the doorway, taking in the scene, their president facing a uniformed fire chief surrounded by official documentation. "What is happening here?" asked Walter Green, the HOA treasurer. "Your association president confiscated emergency medical equipment from my disabled son, resulting in an emergency hospitalization," I explained calmly. I am here in my capacity as District Fire Chief to address multiple code violations that have created serious safety hazards within this community. I projected the security footage onto the wall again, this time showing the full sequence. Karen taking the tank, the ambulance arriving, and paramedics rushing into my home. "Is this true, Margaret?" Walter asked, his expression horrified. "She was enforcing the rules," Karen insisted, though her voice wavered. "His medical equipment was not properly stored according to guidelines." "The guidelines themselves violate county code and federal ADA requirements," I responded, turning to the final binder. "This document details every violation identified within your current HOA policies. The potential liability extends to every board member who knowingly enforced these non-compliant regulations." I watched as the realization spread across Karen's face. This was no longer a battle she could win with clipboards and violation notices. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice smaller now. "Immediate revocation of all citations and fines issued against my property. Full acknowledgement of medical exemptions for my son's equipment. A formal safety inspection of all HOA policies to bring them into compliance with county codes," I listed professionally. "Alternatively, I can file this official investigation report with the County Enforcement Division, which will trigger automatic reviews, hearings, and potential personal liability for all involved parties." The white-gloved finger of my right hand tapped the final document, a formal investigation notice that required only my signature to activate county-level enforcement. "You cannot threaten us," Karen attempted, but Walter and the other board members were already shaking their heads. "We need to call an emergency board meeting," Walter stated, "today." Karen's carefully maintained control center had transformed into a tribunal where she now faced judgment from the very authority she never knew existed within her jurisdiction. The HOA's power dynamic had permanently shifted, and we all knew it. "I will give you 24 hours to begin remediation," I said, gathering my credentials but leaving the binders on the desk. "My son's well-being is not negotiable." The community center buzzed with unprecedented attendance the following evening. Every chair was filled, with additional residents standing along the walls. News had spread quickly through the neighborhood about the confrontation at the HOA office, though details varied in the telling. The board members sat at their usual table at the front, but the usual confidence was notably absent. Legal counsel had been hastily arranged and sat nervously reviewing documents. I stood at attention in my formal uniform near the side wall, deliberately visible but not imposing. Walter Green called the emergency meeting to order with a gavel tap that seemed to echo in the tense room. "This emergency session of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association has been called to address serious allegations regarding HOA practices and specific actions taken by the current administration," he announced, his voice steady but grave. The projector clicked on, displaying time-stamped footage of Karen removing the oxygen tank from my property. A collective gasp rose from the audience. For those who have not heard, this action resulted in the emergency hospitalization of a 14-year-old resident with cystic fibrosis, Walter continued. The board has reviewed documentation provided by Fire Chief James Reeves, which identifies numerous violations of county safety codes, ADA requirements, and potential liability issues affecting our entire community. Karen sat stiffly in her president's chair, eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look at either the screen or the audience. "Our legal counsel has advised us that the HOA's current policies regarding medical equipment disability accommodations, and enforcement procedures require immediate revision to avoid potential litigation and county intervention, Walter explained. A vote was called to address the immediate issue of leadership. All in favor of removing Margaret Wilkins from the position of HOA president, effective immediately, please raise your hand. Hands rose across the table in unanimous agreement. Thomas from the maintenance committee stood from his seat to collect Corinne's nameplate from in front of her, the small act carrying enormous significance. Walter was appointed interim president. His first official act was to read a formal apology that the board had prepared. On behalf of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association, I extend our deepest apologies to the Reeves family for the unconscionable actions taken against them, he read, his voice shaking slightly. We acknowledge the serious harm caused and accept full responsibility for the failings in our policies and their enforcement. Corinne remained isolated in her chair, former allies creating obvious distance by shifting their seats away from her. Throughout the audience, neighbors whispered and occasionally glanced back at me standing at attention in uniform. Effective immediately, all citations and fines issued against the Reeves property are rescinded, Walter continued. Additionally, a permanent medical exemption is granted for all necessary equipment and accommodations. A committee was formed on the spot to review and revise HOA policies regarding medical accommodations, with resident Barbara Chen appointed as chair due to her background in healthcare administration. Medical necessity will be explicitly prioritized over aesthetic concerns in all future HOA decisions, Barbara announced to approving nods throughout the room. As the meeting concluded, Corinne attempted one final assertion of authority, approaching me in the parking lot with her voice raised about special treatment and setting dangerous precedents. Her words faltered as several residents formed a protective circle around me, and Walter informed her that the board would be reviewing evidence to determine if civil action regarding the oxygen tank incident would be necessary. Your confiscated property will be returned immediately, Walter told me, handing over the keys to the storage closet where Corinne had placed the oxygen tank and other medical items she had removed from various homes. I appreciate that, I responded professionally. I would also like documentation of all actions taken against my property and family over the past months for my records. Of course, Chief Reeves, Walter agreed quickly. And we would welcome your expertise as we revise our safety and accommodation policies. I accepted the returned oxygen tanks with professional detachment, refusing to show emotional satisfaction despite the profound relief washing through me. My focus remained on accountability rather than retribution. My son should never have been put at risk, I stated firmly. No family should face discrimination for necessary medical equipment. I trust that substantial changes will be implemented and enforced. You have my word, Walter assured me, as former allies of Corinne's approached with their own stories of intimidation and unreasonable demands. The power structure that had threatened my family had been dismantled, not through emotion or conflict, but through professional application of knowledge and authority. Spring brought renewal to Oakwood Estates in more ways than one. Cherry blossoms dotted the community park as Tyler, and I unloaded his equipment from the car after his final hospital follow-up appointment. His oxygen levels had finally stabilized after the damage caused by the incident, though his pulmonologist had added another daily treatment to his regimen. "Dad, look what they did," Tyler said, pointing toward our home. A decorative lattice garden structure had been built around our medical equipment storage area, creating a beautiful trellis where climbing roses were already beginning to bloom. The functional necessity of Tyler's equipment had not been hidden away, but instead incorporated thoughtfully into the landscape. Barbara Chen waved from across the street where she was supervising the installation. "The garden club wanted to help. Is it okay?" "It is perfect," I responded, watching Tyler approach the structure with cautious approval. After 3 weeks at my sister's house, bringing Tyler home had been a moment of both anxiety and triumph. The new HOA board had not only rescinded all violations against our property, but had passed comprehensive new medical accommodation guidelines that were being shared with other communities as a model policy. I watched my son breathe easily on the front porch swing, no longer afraid of being visible with his oxygen. The weight that had pressed upon both of us for months had finally lifted. As district fire chief, I now consulted regularly with the HOA board, developing protocols that prioritized safety and accessibility. Walter had proven to be a thoughtful leader, focused on building community rather than controlling it. Chief Reeves called Mrs. Abernathy from next door, an elderly resident who had previously kept to herself. I was wondering if someone could help me fill out this form. She held up an accommodation request for a small ramp to her front door, something she had needed for years but had been afraid to request under Corinne's administration. "My arthritis makes those steps nearly impossible some days." "I would be happy to help," I replied, "and the fire department offers free safety inspections for seniors if you would be interested." Healing happened in small moments throughout the spring. The teenager from down the street approached me about learning emergency response for his babysitting certification. Robert Geller organized a community emergency preparedness workshop that broke attendance records. Corinne's house sold quietly in April, her moving truck departing without community farewells. The "for sale" sign was replaced by a young couple with a child who had hearing impairments. The new board immediately approved their request for visual doorbells and alert systems. The annual Memorial Day block party transformed into something meaningful beyond mere formality. Instead of Corinne's rigid control of activities, residents organized inclusive events and shared resources. Tyler sat with other neighborhood children, his oxygen tank beside him without shame or concealment, teaching them how to build model airplanes despite limited lung capacity. I stood in uniform not to intimidate, but to serve, helping children roast marshmallows while answering their curious questions about fire safety. Tyler's equipment stood proudly visible under its decorative trellis, functional necessity, and community aesthetics finally in harmony. As fireflies rose across lawns that no longer required precise measurement, I reflected on how true safety comes not from rigid rules, but from communities protecting their most vulnerable. Tyler slept peacefully now, window open to a neighborhood that finally understood that accommodating difference strengthens rather than weakens community bonds. The uniform hanging in my closet represented not just authority exercised in a moment of crisis, but responsibility fulfilled to protect those who deserve to breathe freely, in every sense of the word.